So hi everyone. Thank you for coming. My name is Kristen Stubbs. I am in the Columbus City Center, the advocacy co-chair. So I will hand it over to our panelists to introduce themselves.
I'll jump in. I am Isoke Miller-Harris. My name says president right now. Sorry, but I'm not president. I am Isoke Miller-Harris, IIDA Columbus director.
Alrighty. I'll jump next. Hey there, my name's Elena Carson. I'm also in the Columbus City Center. I serve as the co-director and passed my NCIDQ last year.
Hi, my name is Bethany Williams. I live in the Cleveland-Akron City Center, and I'm currently the past president for the chapter, and I'm joining you today as an NCIDQ ambassador.
I can go. My name is Morgan Mitchell. I currently serve as Student Relations Co-Chair for the Columbus City Center, and I am currently in the process of taking my NCIDQ tests.
And I see where Hunter just joined. He's our next panelist. Introduce himself.
Hi, I am the co-leader for outreach on the City Center IIDA board. Are we saying anything else?
When you passed your NCIDQ?
Okay, cool. I did mine with Isoke back in 2021.
Yeah.
So
April. I didn't say when I passed, but thank you, Hunter. Yes.
Yeah, 2021. So about 2 years ago. 2 years ago?
Yeah, I know.
2 years ago.
Well, thanks, guys. So Bethany has a short presentation that she's going to start with.
Thank you. I'll get it all teed up here. All right. So as I mentioned when I introduced myself, I am an ambassador for NCIDQ. And the reason I became an ambassador is because when I went through my NCIDQ journey, it was a pain. It was very difficult. I had a hard time with it and really just wanted to help everyone with their journey. So I'm here as a resource. We're going to do a really quick overview of this. Can you see the presentation okay?
We're seeing your behind the scenes presentation.
I had
the presenter mode.
Yeah.
Okay. There we go. Thank you. You would think by year 3 we'd know all these technology things, but we're not there yet. Okay, so we're going to do a super quick overview of what the test is, how to apply, the qualifications, give you a couple of new different things if you're already on your NCIDQ journey and maybe want to hear some of the updates. And then at the end, I'll have my contact info. So if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. There's a million things we could talk about with this, but I'm just going to give you some high level stuff. So we're going to kick it off with recent changes, talk about the exam info, how to apply, important dates and deadlines, and some studying ideas. So what is new to the test? This is really hot off the press. So if you got a coworker who's been a couple years past that's taken their test, they might not know this info yet. So we are really coming at you hot here. So first thing, the work experience requirements will be changing. So if you have not applied yet, there is a whole application process that we're going to review, and the work experience requirements will be changing starting in 2024. The second piece of information is there is a really great resource handbook for candidates that is on CIDQ's website that goes through everything about the certification process. I would definitely take a look at it, get yourself familiar with it. There's probably some little tidbits in there that's going to be really helpful for you. And then the third one, which is kind of mind-blowing, is that you can now take the multiple choice exams, which are the IDFX and the IDPX, remotely. You do not have to go to one of the proctoring centers and take it in one of the testing centers. You can do it remotely. So some quick exam basics to give you a quick overview. There's 3 parts of the exam, different sections that you'll have to take. The first one is the IDFX, which is multiple choice. And the IDFX is designed for recent graduates. It's going to test you a lot on book learning and things that you were learning through your design education. You can take this part as a student or as a recent graduate before you obtain all of your work experience. This test is 125 questions and is 3 hours long. The second section of the exam is the IDPX, which is the professional multiple choice test. And this part of the exam, it does require you to have 2 years work experience because it's going to dive in a lot more into the practical application of interior design. This one has a little bit more questions. It's 175 and you have 4 hours to complete that portion of the test. And then the third part of the test is the practicum, which has a multiple ways of testing you, whether it's a hotspot, a drag and place, or fill in the blank. A lot of people get confused on this one and think, do I need to learn different programs to take this test? No, it's not like in AutoCAD or in Revit or anything like that. It's pretty intuitive on how to take it, but it is broken up into 3 different case studies. There's a small commercial, a large commercial, and a residential case study. And within those case studies, there's a total of 114 questions. And you do have 4 hours to take that portion of the test. All right, so diving in quickly, and it's not for the IIDA people. If any questions come up in the chat, just stop me and shout them out. We can take a look at them. For the IDFX exam, this is a breakdown of the content on what you'll be tested on. So you can see a lot of this stuff that's covered is like universal design, materials, construction drawings and schedules, programming and analysis, a lot of the things that you learn about when you're in school without much design practice. The test does change every so often. These percentage breakdowns, there's a practice analysis that gets sent out to professionals and kind of gauges how the industry is changing. I think it's important to kind of know that the test is always up to date on what the current kind of standard or expectation is of the industry, but these percentages don't change a ton. The one may change from 5 to 10 or 10 to 20, but you're not going to see like all of a sudden the IDFX is testing you on something completely different. For the most part, it's a lot of those initial concepts that you're learning within design school. Looking at the second portion of the test, the IDPX or the professional exam, again, this is all multiple choice, but this one we're starting to get into a lot of the application of interior design and what you do once you start working within a firm or a furniture dealership or et cetera. So a lot of project assessment, there's professional business practices, a little bit more on codes and laws and regulations, and integration of FF&E and contract administration. And then the last portion of the exam is the practicum exam. So this is one where it's not multiple choice. You have drag and drop or hotspots, fill in the blanks. You're going to see a lot more like plans and specifications and codes and a little bit more of that direct application. So this part of the test will cover programming and analysis, a lot of codes and laws and regulations, integration with building systems and construction, as well as contract documents. When you get into each of these exams, there's different resources that are available to you. The practicum specifically, the way it's broken down into the 3 different case studies, you'll get a set of construction documents that you'll be tested on. You know, they're not going to give you a full set and you only look at 3. They'll give you the plans and elevations and et cetera that you'll be tested on. There's also codes that are available that you'll be looking at that are all sort of resources built into the program. So you don't really walk into the exam with any of those items. They're provided to you as you take the test.
Bethany, we do have a question in the chat.
Yeah.
It says, with the work requirements changing, once I apply and get accepted, will I have to reapply under the new work experience requirements, or am I accepted and approved today? Will it be good to go for the next 5 years of eligibility?
Nope, great question. You will not have to reapply. And once that change is instated, it will go from that point forward. A lot of people like to see the passing rates of the exam, so this can kind of be a little bit of a depressing slide, but I also find some positiveness in this. So you'll see this is a tough exam to pass with a little bit over 50% passing rate. But as I mentioned earlier with the analysis that's done every 5 years and making sure the test is up to date. I do think this gives a little bit of legitimacy and credibility to the exam, that once you're passed, that is truly is testing you on your skills and abilities as an interior designer, and is really a great stamp of approval. So don't let this get too depressing or too, discouraging, if you will. I think it's a good legitimacy for our career. Another interesting fact is that CIDQ has, as they gather with other testing organizations, or have found that there has been a decline in passing rates due to COVID and due to students doing courses online, due to those emerging into the workforce, having a lot of remote work and not as much mentoring and office experience. So I thought that was really interesting. If anyone is kind of getting ready to take the test and maybe working on their work experience, there is something to be said about working in the office. I know we all love our remote work, but they are finding that there's a huge impact within passing rates for those that have less experience working with others and gaining knowledge from more experienced designers. Okay, so eligibility paths. There's a multitude of paths. All of this info is on the website. I'm happy to send this out to anyone if you need some additional information. The typical kind of path that we see is someone who's going to school for a bachelor or a master's degree, whether it's CIDA or non-CIDA accredited school for interior design. So with that degree under your belt, you will need approximately 2 years of full-time working experience. There's a little bit of time within college that you're allowed to include if you did an internship with when you were in school on how you get to that 2 years. But for the most part, it's 2 years. Anything kind of outside of that, like an associate's degree, whether you went to school for architecture, you can see you need just a little bit more work experience before you're able to apply for the test. Once you obtain these 2 years of work experience, or even kind of suggested as you're working on it, to work with a direct supervisor within your firm who is NCIDQ certified, or a sponsor. So that would be like an NCIDQ ambassador like myself. If you find you're working in a firm and no one is NCIDQ certified, please reach out to me or another ambassador, and we can work with you to make sure you're getting the experience that you need, and then also sign off on the end. Okay, so this is the point that I talked about earlier that's going to be changing coming February 1st, 2024. So if you've already applied and you're working on your testing, you're good. But if you haven't applied and you're kind of debating on when you want to make that, just know that starting February 1st of next year, you will have a little bit more stringent requirements on your work hours. So they want to make sure that you are really covering all of the different hours that you're going to be, or the different areas that you're going to be tested on when looking at your work hours. You'll notice that these hours, if you're quick at math, don't quite add up to the hours that are required. So there is definitely still flexibility. Like, it's not like you're dividing all of your time evenly amongst these areas, but it's really just kind of making sure that everyone's getting covered where they need to be covered and you're getting the experience before you start taking the exam. So again, that doesn't start till next year. Okay, if you haven't applied yet, some of the process for application, if you're out of school, you have your 2 years experience and you're ready to take all 3 parts of the test, that's at the bottom here. So you'll need your school transcripts. You'll upload your work verification form, again, signing off on those hours, either with a direct supervisor or an NCIDQ ambassador, and then you'll pay your fee and submit. If you are in college or freshly graduated and working towards those hours and are ready to take your IDFX, it just breaks it down. You'll submit those your school transcript and pay for your application fee to take the IDFX. And then once you're ready to take the other 2 parts, you'll need to upload the work verification forms as well as resubmit your transcripts. Dates and deadlines. So the exams are always administered either in April, the whole month of April from the 1st to the 30th, or in October. And again, the whole month, you can schedule it any day you want, Saturday, Sunday, time of day, morning, afternoon, etc. Totally up to you. But the exams are administered those 2 months of the year. So kind of backing up from that, your payment period and the way you schedule is the 3 months prior to that. So if you're looking to take the test in April, you have from now until March 31st to schedule. If you're thinking about waiting to take a part of the exam in October, you'll be able to schedule and pay for that starting in July. And then kind of backing up before that, if you haven't applied yet to start that process, it's the 4 months sort of prior to that. So from August 1st to January 31st is the deadline to apply if you're wanting to take the tests in April, or if you're ready to take it in October, February 1st through July 31st. It's not super stringent on like when you apply for the exam, but it is important to know that you do have 5 years once you apply to complete all 3 parts of the exam. So if you can kind of be strategic about that, whether if you're kind of planning right now, you're ready to go, then go ahead and apply. If you think you want to wait a little bit and start studying, but not quite ready to apply and start that process, here's the date breakdown, just so you can kind of strategize a little bit. The test is a little crazy. So this is the breakdown showing you of the application fees. So when you are submitting your transcript and your work hours, there is an application fee of $225, and it breaks down at the top if you're doing the IDFX first. And then once you go to take each test, there is a fee per section. So the IDFX is $295, the IDPX $355, and the practicum $460. And that's every time you take that test. So if you take one part and unfortunately fail and need to take it again, you'll have to pay that exam fee again. The application fee is a one-time deal. Once you're accepted and start taking the test, you only pay that once. So that's great. Okay, studying for the exams. There's all sorts of resources out there. These are a couple of things that are on CIDQ's website. It is important to note that they do not provide any sort of study materials themselves, but you can go on and see the exam blueprints. There are some practice questions that you can take a look at and start to get familiar with either the IDFX or the IDPX. And then a couple of practicum exam resources. I'm sure once we get to the panel portion, you'll hear everyone's favorite study materials and what made them successful. So definitely lean on your peers and colleagues to kind of hear what they like to test with. Once you take the multiple choice portions of the exam, you do get a preliminary score report. I think it by the time you get to your car out of the testing center, I think it actually emails it to you. It's pretty quick. So this is just a quick synopsis of where you are and letting you know, kind of gauging at the different testing areas and how you scored on them. Once all of the tests are complete, there is a little bit of a period after each testing. I think it's about like a month and a half-ish that CIDQ goes through all of them, and then you'll get your official results. But if you kind of wanted to see if you're above or below the passing rate, this will give you a quick synopsis. And then just closing out there, the CIDQ staff is fantastic. I've reached out to them several times for different things. I also put my info on there in pink. So please do not hesitate to reach out to me. Again, as ambassadors, we're kind of here to help you through this process. We can connect you with anyone of any info you need. So please don't hesitate to reach out. And I'll put this in the chat too, so you can have a reference.
Great. Thank you, Bethany. So we'll get started with our discussion with our panelists. We can go around our Zoom room for you guys. So first question, what led you to taking the NCIDQ exams?
I'll get started. I'll kick it off. I really was more so, I took it about 8 years after I graduated. So really wanting to kind of make sure that I am solidifying my career path and making sure that I am advancing in my career. So that was the reason I did it. Also just making sure that I was knowledgeable as much as I could in the industry.
I think for me, it was something I've known about since I was about a sophomore in college. Like our program talked about it a lot from day one. here's something that you're going to want to target. Here's something you're going to work towards. Here's some kind of initial understanding of what it's going to take. And then when I graduated, I saw that a lot of my peers had taken it upon themselves to take the exam. And I felt like for myself professionally, this was a choice that I really wanted to make and really wanted to pursue. And so, starting to research it and get into it. And then it seemed like the time was right when I took it. And so for me, it was really about progressing myself in my career and, establishing myself as a designer. And, in other states too, outside of Ohio, you can, stamp drawings. So just the flexibility of licensure and, being able to be self-sufficient. So a lot of those reasons kind of helped me want to pursue this.
Yeah, I would echo a lot of what is being said. The demonstration of health, safety, welfare, that giant piece of a commercial interior designer's job was a big driver for me. There's, the perception of decorators and designers being synonymous, but I felt that, these credentials and obviously my knowledge thereof would really help differentiate me in that way, both within my firm and to the clients that we serve, to prove that we are, knowledgeable in all sorts of, facets of design.
Yeah, I would definitely echo that kind of technical piece of things. For me, I was raised by an architect. And so for me, there's a lot of pressure to go into architecture when I was choosing my path in school. And for me, deciding to go in the interior route because I was more passionate about it, but still wanting to have kind of the credentials and the backup and the knowledge and the ability to say that I have this certification that I'm working towards. So one day I will have it, but that I would have this certification that it would put me on par and make me have kind of that similar respect level and education level and just knowledge base that my architecture peers have in this industry.
We move on to the next question. Do you recommend taking the exams at a certain time in your career?
I can jump in on this one. I would say it's probably going to be different for everybody. I personally felt that I wanted to get a good amount of work experience under my belt personally, like beyond the requirements for applying, just to build up my own self-confidence and feel like I was, mentally prepared and kind of knew what I was talking about. So I worked for about, I think, 3.5 or 4 years before I began like seriously considering NCIDQ and applying. But it really was in the studying process that much more advantageous to be able to apply a concept or a skill or a term or whatnot to my real world experience. I think that direct correlation to be able to tie that back was so impactful. With that real world experience. So I would advocate for at least a little experience under your belt, but that was just my path.
I would absolutely echo that. For me, the experience helps me prepare for the exam, especially the practicum portion and the IDPX. You kind of don't know a lot about contracts or, furniture packages or, some of the code aspects until you really do it, right? Like in school, you may or may not have had a lot of experience with real building code. And the more time that you spend working with it, the more natural it becomes. You're like, oh, okay, I know that I need this height for this thing. I need this depth for that thing. And those become like second nature to you. And just having those built in, when you get to the exam really makes it a lot more, makes you more successful, I think. And it gives you a better step up in being able to pass. Yeah.
I think that I was maybe a little zealous when I started my process. I think I started probably 1.5 years or so after school because they kind of gave that introduction of saying that you could take it while you're still in school and that you could take it right after. And so I think my process of thinking that concept was going to apply and work for me, I think I might have been a little overzealous at the beginning. I wound up being a little postponed taking my actual first test due to COVID. But I do think that the work experience and like reading the book while learning while I was doing at work actually helped me be better at work, to even just be reading that book and understanding some of the things that should be in drawing standards that I maybe didn't get the full expanse on like in practice from school. And then I actually took the TX last spring. And I did not pass it that first time, but I was really close on it. And the things that I was short on were project management pieces that I hadn't got to practice yet. And so with another year of experience, I'm planning on taking it this spring. And so I think that an extra year for me, I'm coming up on 4 full years of practicing. I think that extra year is going to make a huge difference in me actually having that practice in my pocket for when I go to take the exam.
Yeah, I can allude to the work experience being no joke. I started out my career working for Joanne Fabrics and store planning, and there was a lot of design that just was not touched on in that realm of the industry. And I was not ready to take the test. I had my work hours, but not kind of covering some of those things. And truth be told, I failed the practicum twice. Like be humble. I did not pass it because I was not ready for it. There's also a couple of questions in the chat about the practicum, and the written part, the old drafting portion was so much different, and those were the portions I failed. Then when they switched it to the new portion, I passed. So I think there's something to be said about that, but definitely make sure you feel comfortable and have some great work experience on all aspects before you dive in. There's nothing wrong with taking a little extra time if needed.
I'll also put a plug in real quick for be mindful of whatever season in your personal life you are in and how that relates to studying and your capacity and whatnot. You know, we all have things going on. And if you know you're not in a time where you can really dedicate to studying, like that's okay to take a break. It's okay to come back and hit it hard when you have more availability. Looking back, I personally took all 3 exams last spring and was fortunate enough to pass them all in my first try. But I was super rigorous with my study schedule and very dedicated, and don't think that would have been remotely possible had I not pretty much studied every day. And on the flip side of that, I knew after 3 or 4 months of that rigor, I was not going to be able to sustain that any longer. So I was going to need to take a break after that test period, regardless of what the outcome was. So I feel lucky that I'm one and done, but just keep that in mind. It is definitely a commitment on your free time. So keep that in mind when scheduling and thinking about the study process.
Yeah, I'll jump in with that. Hunter and I took it during COVID. He was my study buddy, so that's and we were actually doing an NCIDW prep talk when we both realized that we were studying at the same time, and that's how we became study buddies. So if you see anybody familiar in here, they might become your study buddy. So make some connections. But yes, we took it over the lockdown, or we were studying, I guess I should say, during the lockdown. And I think that for me was like the biggest, like, all right, well, it's winter, it's a lockdown. I'm going to be like at home most of the time, all of the time. So this is probably the best time for me to start studying. And that's so as you're saying, like just knowing what life is going on at the time to know when you can start that process.
Yeah, I'll echo and say also, like, Asoke and I's biggest thing to say was give yourself grace as we were going through this process, right? Like, you are a person, you have all these other things going on, you can only do so much. And, you know, as long as you showed up in the room and you tried, you're going to learn something. You're going to learn something about yourself. You're going to learn something about the exam. It's going to prep you to take it again if you have to. And if not, you might just get lucky and pass and be amazing, you know? So I really think that you just have to give yourself a lot of grace in this process.
So we do have a question in the chat, which is actually one of our discussion questions. So we can skip to that one. We have a question. What would you recommend on time commitment and study schedule techniques?
I think a lot of this depends on kind of your media or what kind of studying tools you're using as well. I personally invested in the Q Practice study group that IIDA offers at a discounted rate, which is awesome. But that was an overarching study program that touched each of the 3 exams and did a lot of legwork for you in terms of they developed a very rigorous schedule of different modules that were broken down by category, and you could filter based on if it covers all 3 exams, if you just were focusing on 1 exam, etc. It was a very handy resource to be able to use, but they also had a corresponding calendar that went along with the modules of if you started at the very beginning and stayed on this pace that they set for you, you would be in good shape, which I did really latch on to that and was very committed to the preset schedule from them. So that really had about a module a day. I would say I would spend 30 minutes to 2 hours, like most evenings after work, depending on what module it was, or swing things to the weekend and really stack either on Saturday or Sunday, like a bigger chunk of my time where I could bust through some of those. And that was a very linear process, I would say, what they set up. But I really took attention to the things that are easy, you know it, move on. The things I struggled with, that platform had additional support topics and videos and discussion questions on kind of those other areas that I needed a little more help with, and would therefore like carve out, you know, extra time to look at those things. So I know everybody doesn't have that capacity to dedicate that much time, but that was kind of what worked for me.
I'll jump in. Me and Hunter also use Q practice, and I think for me, I would wake up early and I would also do after work. So I would say that after the 3 months of studying, I was pretty burnt out. But wake up early, I would read the lesson or whatever the module was for that day. And sometimes if I had time during the lunch hour, I would take they do different little quizzes of like 5 to 10 question quizzes to each lesson. So I would do that during my lunch hour, and then I'd see what I missed, and then my evening was spent towards what was missed so that I could get the more information on that. And sometimes I would even dig further than just the videos and stuff that they provided. There's Archie Corner on YouTube. He's a great resource as well. So I dug a little bit deeper into the items that I needed to.
Yeah. For me, it was Q practice was like a great path to follow. They break down the sections of reading for each of the modules too, for the book. I don't know if we've talked about the book, but there's the book, David Ballast or something like that. And I read that thing cover to cover. It was like 250 pages, a lot of diagrams, a lot of sketches, but Q practice kind of gave me what sections I needed to read what night. And then I literally would sit at my counter and just go through and take notes through the pages. I would read all 20, 30, 40 pages that night, take a bunch of notes, and then I would take the Q practice quiz to see, okay, did I absorb that information, or did I just like have a night where I like was reading and didn't process it? But like every night it was probably somewhere between like an hour and 3 hours for the entire period. And then I definitely would spend at least one day on the weekend, if not both days. And then towards like the last 2 weeks, I was spending like all of my free time studying just right up until the exam. But then between the first 2 exams and the prac, I took like 3 days off so that I could breathe for a minute before I prepped again for the prac, because you kind of, after those first couple of exams, you're pretty wiped out.
Yeah, I've been spreading my tests out. So when I took it, the first one a couple of years ago, I did do Q practice, and I think it helped me a lot to break that book down, because that book is kind of a giant monster, and it was really intimidating to like hold this really heavy brick of a book. And so it helped me break that down a lot for that first test. I didn't get Q practice for the second one, and I'm going to get it again for when I take it this spring. So maybe there is some proof into that Q practice. But for me, the pre-tests were the biggest kind of draw to it, because I don't learn the best by just reading. I don't absorb it the same way that I do from actual practice. So again, going back to the work experience, being able to take those practice tests and understand what pieces I was and wasn't understanding and how they were going to ask questions on the test was really my biggest thing for how I study and how I learn. So I plan on getting it in February. So I'm not actually getting it for the full 3 months that they typically suggest. I'm also not even getting it for the 3rd month. I'm just getting it for the month of February, just so I can kind of go back through, refresh it a little bit, take those tests, and then get back to studying the things that I didn't absorb as much kind of during that month. So that's my plan for this spring.
Yeah, I'd add on to what Morgan's saying, like at least 1 month of it is probably worth the investment, because understanding the interface for the practicum, it's really similar on Q Practice, and just being able to kind of get a handle on the things that Bethany was saying in terms of the different drag and drops, the fill in the blanks, etc. Just having that interface understood before you show up is going to really help you, I think, on the day of the prac.
Thank you, everyone. We did have another question in the chat. What's the duration for the scheduled modules? I am actually also studying currently for the IDFX. I haven't taken any exams yet, but I am in Q Practice, and the modules aren't necessarily scheduled. It's more of a kind of take it at your own pace. There's usually like a reading section, and it has like a voiceover that you can listen to it if you're doing something else. Sometimes there's videos, so you just kind of take it at your own pace.
But if you are looking for like being told what to do, there is a
Yes.
calendar, and they do tell you what module you're working on. It's pretty much every day, including I think Saturday and Sunday. I think it was every single day up until like the last week of March or something like that, if your April testing period starts. So you end like just prior to April testing. So if you take your exam later in April, then if you followed every one of those days, then you actually have a couple more weeks to continue to study the content that you may have struggled with while you were kind of pushing through all that content.
And to clarify, what Hunter's describing is the trajectory and the tell you what to do if you're planning all three. There is the way to say filter, I only want modules that pertain to this one or these two exams, or instead of all three. Which there is a good amount of overlap. I feel like this is a good tie-in here. I'd say the concepts overlap a ton between all three exams. It's more so how the question is phrased. For example, the FX, I would say, is very straightforward. Like, you know it or you don't, a lot of the questions. Whereas the PX, that's a little bit more practical application, they phrase things in a different way. It still might be talking about programming and analysis, but the type of question they give you is slanted a little bit more towards critical thinking, even though it's still either like multiple choice format. So I do think there's some merit in joint studying for the exams, at least the FX and the PX, since they are similar in format and a lot of that overlap. But again, I think it really just depends on how much time and you're willing and able to invest and what works for you. So.
So next question, what is your biggest takeaway from your exam experience that you would want to share with those beginning the process? I think we've talked about that a little bit, but if anyone has anything to add to that.
Yeah, I was just going to say what Hunter said earlier is to give yourself grace. Like it is truly a monster of a process and a journey. So like, don't be too hard on yourself if you're getting behind on studying or if like life gets in the way. It's absolutely understandable, and give yourself grace.
Yeah. I was just going to tag on to that. Like, it's okay. If you don't master a concept 100% perfectly, that is a-okay as well. I mean, we're going to continue to evolve and learn in our careers over time. And as it relates to the exam, especially when you're taking the test and the pacing is pretty steady, like you have to keep it moving on those tests and not get too flustered and hung up on a certain question. Because there's such a wide range of topics covered, I would say it's okay to have that range of knowledge rather than like get stressed about, oh my gosh, I really don't understand how to do these like occupancy calculations. Like, know your strengths, know your weaknesses, and try to study on those, but also don't get hung up too much. Like, keep it moving. Like, there's a lot to cover, and if you miss one question, that doesn't mean you're gonna fail the whole test. So good perspective to keep in mind once you're in it.
Yeah, I'd add that, like, for me, the big takeaway was just how much I learned. Like, you know, you go to school for so long, but you don't always get into the real world stuff. And when you start to read about like the code, like I hardly ever really got into code in college. We just never, we tried, but they just didn't get to the level that you really need to know. And I feel like that was a huge thing for me, like understanding the resources, like the ICC, the IBC, all the acronyms, the, you know, the ADA, and just kind of understanding all the resources that we have to sort through and how to, you know, navigate them, how to find the information. Like those were really useful tools to gain. And then just the things that you don't even know about until you start to do them on the job, like the contract work or some of the oh goodness, the proposal work or whatever else we do that you don't learn in school.
I think a piece for me also is, along with that kind of grace quote from Hunter and Ahsoke, the grace of even just splitting it up and just kind of going at your own pace. I know a lot of people that have taken all three together, and I greatly like bow to you for taking that on, because it is quite the undertaking. But for me, it just didn't feel feasible to be able to subject that kind of time to it, and also just to feel like I had that understanding base. So for me, splitting them up has been more reasonable for my own just personal life. And then as I look at April, I was going to take PX and Prac together. And then I looked at my calendar, like my social calendar, and I have got a bunch of weddings to go to and all this stuff. And I'm like, I'm not going to be able to devote the time that I need to. And so that kind of balance of life and studying is really important for me. So splitting those tests up was in my own personal best interest.
Do you have another question in the chat from Danielle? She said she's planning to take her IDFX this spring. A friend who just received her NCIDQ suggested that she take the IDPX and the PRAC in the fall because those tests overlap quite a bit. Would you guys agree?
Definitely in the sense of it's like the practical critical thinking application of knowledge. Yes, they overlap. The format is super different. But to my comment earlier about everything's kind of all one and the same, like just a different way to skin the cat, I think that would be a great approach. Definitely starting with the FX, I think, is a great approach also to get your feet wet and get that one under your belt.
Yeah, I feel like FX and PX are really good to take together because they're kind of your fundamentals in your professional practice, right? So those two are very similar, multiple choice kind of style exams. And the content is kind of the basis of what you're going to need to know for the PRAC. And then if you were to do the PRAC separate, since it's a different type of exam and it relies on those others, I think ending on that one would be probably more the route you would want to consider.
I definitely don't think there's any wrong way to do it. Like there's no magic trick either, you know? I think, yeah, it's the time, it's the dedication leading based on your capacity and what you feel comfortable and confident achieving, so.
All right, we have about 13 minutes left, so we have one more discussion question, and then I'll open up to any more questions that you guys may have. So how has being a certified interior designer helped you in your career?
I feel like we definitely already touched on it. Like I definitely feel way more knowledgeable after studying. A big piece of studying for the PRAC in particular that Q Practice preaches is don't just memorize the code number or what it means, like actively get in the habit of practicing. Oh, this is an ANSI A117 and it's under the accessibility section, and like actually going and looking it up each time, which really just helps build and reinforce Hunter's point, like what you go for, where you need to look for what and what you need to sift through. So that exercise of studying and applying that in my career, I feel way more confident and knowledgeable in. And that's the thing with the PRAC too. They're not expecting you to remember all of the things, but you do need to quickly know where to go during the exam, which, like as Bethany mentioned, they provide like little tabs at the top of your screen of the different codes that apply to working on. So sometimes the answers are clearly found there, but it's really on you to have the knowledge of where to look for. Like super directly translates to my career for sure.
Yeah, I agree. I'm jumping in on that is being able to be in a meeting and with a bunch of architects and being able to calculate occupancy and then being like, oh, you do know what you're doing. Like, it has also been really great. And then on top of that, of just knowing knowledge base is also my firm has seen my advancement in getting this and being promoted to associate and being able to have that under my belt has been really good too.
I think there's a little bit more of confidence in yourself as a designer too, that comes from going through this process. You feel like you know more about it, so now you actually can be a voice of an educated voice in the room. And when you start to think about your design as you go forward with projects, you're a lot more thoughtful of the things that are going to become issues in the future, so you're more conscientious of how you're working. I will add just one little thing that's kind of fun is as you go through these like crazy tests that Elena was referencing, Google them and look them up, because this stuff's crazy. Some of the things that they do to test product.
Yeah.
It's really cool. Some of the UL things that they do with fire and burning the broom corner test. It's just crazy what products have to go through. And so kind of learning what those terms mean too is really fun. So when you start to talk with manufacturers more, you kind of know what the products are meeting.
Yeah, I would say that since I'm still in the process, I think it's just made me more curious and I'm able to ask more intelligent questions when I am at work. And so when I can sit in the room with my boss who's an architect or any of the other architects and be able to ask questions that pertain to code or that pertain to life safety or any of these other things or writing contracts, I think it has made me have more intelligent questions and things that are based in kind of my readings. And if I read something and then I'm working on it later on in the week or a couple of weeks later, I'm like, oh, I remember reading about that, or just kind of back and forth with that. So I think it's just made me be more curious and more intelligently curious, and just comprehensive in that understanding in the language.
I echo everything everyone said, and just will add that there's a lot of credibility when working with clients and speaking to clients, which I have kind of found trickles into a little bit of advocating for the profession to the general public. There's a lot of times we've had clients be like, "What are those letters behind your name on your business card?" It's like, "Oh, well, let me tell you, and let me tell you why it's so important that I have that test, and that you're now working with me as a certified designer." So it opens the door to a lot of really great conversations and just advancing our profession all around.
And on that note, Ohio currently does not have any sort of statewide recognition around becoming certified. However, IIDA is looking to, in the next handful of years, pursue legislation in Ohio to give us a little bit more acknowledgement and protection in the eyes of the law. So that might be a long road to get there, but IIDA is committed to that advocacy as well, and we're excited about the future.
Yes, as being on the advocacy committee here in Columbus, yes, that is our new goal and what we are working towards, and we are super excited about it. So that's it for our discussion. Were there any more questions? If anyone wants to put anything in the chat or unmute yourself, feel free.
I have a quick question. This is Rain Deering. I've taken, I'm sorry, I have a child in the background. I have taken the fundamentals, the practicum, and I've passed those, and I took the professional exam twice, failing it by one question, like 1 or 2 questions. Very frustrating. And in my experience, you know, the way that the questions are worded are very tricky. And half of my studying was trying to figure out like how they ask the question, right? And I have pretty strong opinions about the way, you know, that they do these trick questions, which are, you know, coined as critical thinking questions, but I don't really believe in that way of testing. never have in my whole, my whole life. But so what's your opinion on those and getting past that hurdle? Because I know that that was my number one hurdle, is just understanding how they're asking the question. Did that make sense?
Absolutely.
Yeah. I like to call it CIDQ land. You're designing for kind of an imaginary land sometimes. One thing that helped me personally when I went through the journey is time management. And so if I got to one of those questions and felt like there was multiple answers, one, I would write them down. Like I was debating between answer A and C. That way, when I got back to the question, I could automatically eliminate B and D. But then would flag it and go back and make sure I had time at the end to kind of reevaluate those. I know that's not really like the most direct answer that you're probably hoping for, but it was something that kind of helped me with the practicum specifically, that I would get through everything, feel confident on the ones that I did feel confident on, and then go back to those and kind of like rethink them through.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was my same process, like strike through things I knew were absolutely like off base and then go back if I had time. Most of the time I didn't have time. So it was a dream. But yeah, it was they were really trying to trip you up. And I think it's just like when you think about what we do in our jobs, it's like taking the time to understand it. I mean, we don't have it on the exam, but like making sure that you're being really thorough in reading all of the information and that you're aware of all the things that are kind of playing into, like when we work on a project, right? Like there's a lot of things that we have to think about to make sure that we're doing our jobs correctly. And I think that they're really just trying to push you to make sure that you're taking all the information in before you evaluate and make a solution, right? But it's tricky. Like they're not out here to play.
Yeah, just one more tactical thing jumping off of that. Like in the current version of the exams, you can like digitally strike through the answers on the interface. You can highlight keywords in the question. I mean, again, that's not always going to get you there, but like sometimes I would really go, okay, like what is the question about? It is about occupancy, or it is about egress. Like highlight that word. Like don't forget that word when they throw in 20 other words. Like that sounds so rudimentary, but I do think it had some merit to like slow down even when you're in a very fast-paced testing environment.
I just wanted to throw in really quickly what Elena said was really helpful as somebody who has written the IDPX questions. I mean, everything has to be cited when writing those. So it comes from all of the suggested texts that the CIDQ people put out there to offer as recommendations for reading. So it has some connection and is grounded not just in something that one person experienced. And I think that there's a tendency to, because it is related to practice, you kind of maybe think that you should rely on things that you have experienced. And it is more so by the book. And I think we all know that it's not, there are a lot of things that are not done by the book.
I'll jump to a question from the chat, probably for Bethany. Does all of the work experience have to be completed at a single company with the same sponsor?
No, it does not. You can add it up as you go. Just the sponsor will kind of sign off on everything all at once. So you can kind of review if there's any work experience prior to that with them, and they can cover it.
I'll jump in and share. I was transitioning jobs right as I was starting to think about this journey and getting kind of flustered in the, oh my gosh, if I leave this job right now, am I gonna lose on all these hours? Like that would suck. And SOS emailed Bethany after one of these webinars, probably a year and a half ago now, like, oh my God, this is my situation, what do I do? And she was very helpful in calming me and having a path forward in a couple different options, whether that was with my former employer, with her, or someone as a sponsor, and kind of talking through the process of, you can kind of build that work verification form prior to sending it off to CIDQ. So that was what she advised me to do, to look back on all of my hours before departing that job when it was maybe a little easier for me to have access to that handy dandy. And I had a conversation with my former employer about, would you be willing to sign off in the future? Like I was leaving on good terms, so that was not a problem. But that's in which Bethany said, if you do run into any challenges, like there's other avenues with the sponsor. So I had that form built from my prior employer and then added on hours after I transitioned jobs and had them signed off by both parties, and we were good to go.
All right, do we have any other questions from anyone? Take that as a no. So this has been great. Thank you to all of our panelists for joining. Are there any last remarks from anyone? I think we've covered a lot of our bases, so I know I learned some things today, so.
No, good luck with everybody, and it's a journey, so take your time and give yourself grace.
Yeah, definitely try to find a study buddy. I would say
Yes.
that is a huge thing. And if you can't build a relationship with someone here, what is it? Q Practice has sort of the chat boards where there's tons of people who are taking it. You could reach out there to try to find someone. I have a friend who did that, and they found someone across the country and they did it.
Right.
So I definitely think finding your support system is really important too, not just your study buddy, but making sure your job's on board, making sure your family's on board, your friends are on board. Like, hey guys, I'm gonna peace out for 4 months. See you soon.
Yeah, that's a good point of thinking, jumping of like, my husband was a great help. Like,
Yeah.
I'm studying, like you can do the dishes, you can do
Yeah.
this. So having
just,
that support is important. Yeah.
Yeah, build your safety net, build your group, and get out there and crush it. You're gonna do awesome.
Yeah, I would just chime in and say I was very intimidated by even applying, navigating the CIDQ website. Like it felt very like a mountain in front of me to even get over that hurdle of getting ready to start. And in reality, it was not that bad. It just know there's people from IIDA, from NCIDQ who are here to help. No question's a stupid question. It is, a unique thing that you're going through, and it's, why would you know how to navigate this process alone? So yeah, lean on your personal network, of course, but also those who've been through it and can assist along the way.
All right, well, this has been great. Thank you all for joining. This is recorded, so I'm sure we will be sending out a recording or saving it somewhere for you to reference if you want to come back and listen to some things. But other than that, everyone have a great evening.